there, I'm Elizabeth with LA's Handcrafted Jewelry, and welcome to my channel where I share tips, tricks, and tutorials for those looking to learn the art of wire wrapping and wire weaving. And today we are doing a Q&A. If you guys have been paying attention to the community pages or maybe my Facebook page, you would have seen that I posted a post asking for your questions for techniques, tips, and things like that. And boy, did you guys deliver. And I'm so thankful for that because I know that you guys are all in different areas of your journey, and I just kind of want to help you exactly where you're at. So I just want to make sure that I answer the questions that mean the most to you where you are right now. All right, question number 1. Fama asks, I would like to ask if it's necessary to use Renaissance wax. Anita asked a similar question, so I'm going to go ahead and ask it in here as well. Been looking at products for sealing finished wraps to stop them from tarnishing and air and moisture proof. Want to know what is best? Renaissance wax, spray clear gloss, finish sealer, acid free, or other wax recommendations, please? All very confusing. Yeah, it's a lot of confusion out there as far as what to use and if you should use it. Personally, for my pieces, I do not unless it's asked of me. Then I will put Renaissance wax is usually what I use. It also leaves a nice finish when you're done polishing it. I have a couple gloss finishes, but I haven't tried them yet, and I'm hoping to kind of do a comparison with some of my pieces, and I'll try and do a video on that more specifically. But as far as answering your question, I would say that it's not necessary unless asked for, or if maybe somebody knows that they have a copper allergy, sometimes that can be beneficial. Question number 2 comes from Lori. She says, how do you make swirls and curls even round? Mine turn out oval. Well, there's a couple ways that I do this. I'll kind of go ahead and give you a little bit of a demonstration here. Usually what I do is I turn it very tightly at the end as much as I can. If I don't like how it's not turning out, I will use my flush cutters and trim that end a little bit so that way it's a little bit more round on the inside. And then I actually apply pressure with my left hand to create more of a swirl. If it starts to get a little bit oblong, I will actually use my flat nose pliers or my chain nose pliers to kind of collect that back in together, like you're seeing here on the screen. And that's usually how I correct that problem. Otherwise, I would say if it's still turning out that way, it just takes practice. So don't give up hope, it will get better, because mine did not turn out very beautiful in the beginning either. Like here's an example of one of my first pieces. So don't give up, and I'm sure that you'll do just fine the more you practice. All right, question number 3 comes from Carol, and she asks, I still want to learn how to wire wrap jewelry. Where should I start? Now, I did answer you, Carol, in your post on Facebook with some blog articles as well as a couple videos. There's a lot of places that you can start, and it just kind of depends on what you want to do. Like there's a lot of different methods out there as far as wire wrapping goes. It's very diverse. So there's wire wrapping where you use square wire and half round wire typically. And then you have weaving, which typically incorporates a little bit of all the shapes, but primarily round wire. And then you have even things like cold forging, which can utilize both as well. And I would say just kind of figure out what style maybe you want to try first, and then look for those specific materials to that style. So if you're starting out with you wanting to wire wrap with square wire and half round wire, I would get maybe starting with 20 gauge square wire, dead soft, as well as half round wire. I have a video all about wire, and I'll tag it up here for you guys if you want to learn more about that. And I'll also tag the blog article that I use in order to kind of help you understand which way you want to go. And I'm trying to update that blog article too, so if there's something in it you don't see, just let me know and I will update the blog article. But otherwise, I would just say, yeah, start looking at the techniques that you want to learn first and get the tools that you need for that, and then start there. All right, question number 4 comes from Megan, and there are a lot of questions from Miss Megan, and that's okay. I was really glad to see that many of you asked multiple questions. So the first one is from Megan, how do you come up with designs? The second one, is there any way of making frame pendants by having a weaved front and 6-wire bail? The third one is, how do you remove scratches and nicks from your wire? Number 4 is, how do you draw out designs, or do you draw out designs before creating? And number 5 is, what are your best website creation tips? And these are a lot of really good questions, and I'm happy to answer what I can. As far as coming up with designs, mostly I'm just inspired by nature, and I'm inspired a lot by different shapes. So a lot of times I'll just doodle in my notebook, and a lot of times I can actually come up with a design just by doodling. So like little swirls here and there, and then I'll be like, hey, that looks really pretty. And then I'll see if I can incorporate that into my designs. Otherwise, I find a lot of inspiration just from other artists, especially when you're first starting out. You don't have a lot of knowledge to draw from, so it's okay to look at other artisans for their designs, and copying them, as long as you give them credit for their designs, is okay. And there are a lot of people like myself, maybe Kelly Jones Jewelry, Oksana, Nicole Hanna. A lot of these artisans, they give out tutorials for free as well as sell tutorials. So if you're looking for a specific style that you're really drawn to, I would look to them and see what they have. And it's perfectly okay to copy as long as you are giving credit for those designs. And then eventually, as you learn those techniques, you can start incorporating them into your work and make it your own. So I hope that answers that question. Number 2, is there a way of making frame pendants by having a weaved front and a 6-wire bail? A 6-wire bail. I mean, I don't see why not. I guess I was a little confused by the question. You can do, so if you're doing, for example, it depends on the size of the stone, but let's say you want to weave 6 wires. You can do that very easily. Just weave around the frame. And then when you want to incorporate all of them, I guess that would be 12. But you could divide them up to where you do 6, and you can do different weave patterns over those 6 wires to create a bail. You can even use the center too, maybe to add a focal stone. I am working on a tutorial back here in the background that incorporates a lot more wires and uses different styles. So I'll share that with you as soon as it comes out. And if you guys are subscribed to my Artisan Tutorial Vault, you'll see all the new tutorials that are coming out. And I try to keep that updated so that way you guys are always learning something new, and I will try and do some for YouTube as well. And number 3, how do you remove scratches and nicks in your wire? Typically what I will do, as long as you are using a solid wire, which I typically do is copper, I will use sandpaper starting with 600 grit and working my way up to 3000 grit. So I usually use 600, 1000, 2000, and then 3000. And that usually will get the nicks out. If they are deep enough though, you might start with even 400 grit and really work on getting that out. You just have to be careful not to wear out your wire too much because it might distort the shape a little bit. Another tool that you can use is a rotary tool, and they come with different grits as well. I think they're called sunburst pads, and they kind of look like little spiky wheels that you put on your rotary tool, and it works the same but just faster than sandpaper, sanding it yourself by hand. I have also heard you can use a tumbler, but I don't own one personally, so I wouldn't be able to answer that question directly. I hope that makes sense. Number 4, do you draw out designs before creating? Most of the time, yes, just to kind of get myself familiar with where I want to use the wires, or maybe I'm trying to develop a new back, because I'm sure you guys have seen some of my backs are a little bit more intricate most commonly, but I also try to do it to where I can create simple designs as possible, so when you turn on the back, you have a nice pretty back. So I do try to focus on that. The other thing is just swirl placement, because I like my swirls to kind of be directed away from each other rather than all going the same direction. So I will try and, rather than mentally trying to do that, I will draw my designs out. Otherwise, I just did a piece recently, this cold forged piece, and I didn't draw out anything. I just kind of made components and put it together. And my hope is to make a tutorial for that as well, a written tutorial, we'll see. But if you're wanting to learn cold forged, do stay tuned, because I do want to do some cold forged pieces as well. But most of the time, I think I do draw out my pieces just so that way I'm mentally familiar with the design and where I'm going with it. And number 5, what are your best website creation tips? I am not an expert with my website, and actually there's a beautiful soul named Kay that did my website recently. If you've gone to my website in the last couple months or so, you will notice, in the last month, you will have noticed that my website is updated and a little bit more cohesive and very nice. So if you want to learn more about that, she's called the Loopy Spoonie, and Loopy Spoon, and I will leave a link to her Instagram and Facebook, and if you have questions you can ask her. But so she does this professionally, so just keep that in mind when you ask her, if you want to maybe become a client of hers. But as far as creating a website, as long as you make sure that it's easy to use, that everything makes sense. Also making sure that you have an about page about yourself, and so that way people can learn more about who you are as an individual. People want to trust you. So by providing that will help. Also making sure that you have policies set up. especially when it comes to maybe returns, and so that way you can assure your customers that, you know, maybe you do accept returns, but it has to be within a certain window. You want to make sure that that kind of stuff is definitely taken care of. Maybe an FAQ, like a frequently asked questions section, is also really good. But otherwise, I don't really have a lot to offer because that is not my area of expertise. But what I would say is maybe look at the brands that of anything, maybe different jewelry, not necessarily wire wrap jewelry, but other brands and what they're doing, and you can glean some information from them as well. So I would just say, just be a student, ask lots of questions, and that will help a lot. Okay, so question number 5. Now this one was from JCat here on YouTube, and I got a lot of questions from them as well. So the first one is how to straighten wires. There's 3 different methods that I give in this video. I am sorry, this is one of my first videos, so it's not the very best. Maybe I will redo it. But in this video, I do show you 3 different methods that I use to straighten wire. The first being with my fingers. The second being with, I think, nylon jaw pliers, which are really handy for longer segments of wire. And the last one, if you have shorter segments of wire and it's hard and difficult to straighten, you can just stick it on your desk. And I use a rubber, square rubber bench block, and I use that to kind of roll over the top. You can use a book, you can use another solid surface as well, and that will help straighten out your wires. Typically though, when I'm doing my pieces, I usually just use my fingers, and that keeps them pretty straight. The second question is how to know when to use 18 gauge wire for a pendant. And I think there's a couple answers that I can give for that. The first is the style of the piece. So maybe you want something that's a little bit more masculine, or a heady wrap, or something that you just want to be a little bit more, I guess, chunky. I don't know if that's the right word for it. Then you would use thicker gauged wires. Otherwise, maybe gauging it by the size of the stone. So if it's like a massive stone, so like starting at like 40 millimeters, you can start using 18 gauge wire. Generally, I just use 20 gauge wire, and then I weave all those wires together. That's generally what I use. Another instance though is if you're cold forging, you might want to use the thicker gauges. Those work really well for me. I usually use generally 14, 16, and 18 gauges for that. So it just kind of depends on what you're using for. But if you're using it for wire wrapping, it's usually just the style preference and maybe the size of the stone. Okay, the third question was, what's the difference between 26 gauge and 28 gauge in a pendant? And I would say basically kind of the same thing. It's just kind of depending on the type of texture you want. Like me personally, I really like the intricate weaving, so I typically use 28 and 30 gauge wires because I really like the fine weaves. But if you're using 26, perhaps you just want a thicker gauge, more heady wrap, maybe more pronounced weave pattern. So that's the only difference. As far as integrity, it's about the same. I haven't had any issues using 28 gauge wire, especially when you weave all over the pendant. It makes it really strong. So I don't usually worry about integrity as much as just style preference. What's the most common size cabochon used to make pendants? When I started, the most common that I used was about 25 to 30 millimeter, and maybe even 40 by 30 millimeter ovals, like they're the larger ones. I typically recommend using larger ones just because they're easier to handle, especially getting smaller, like around 18 millimeter or less. Otherwise, I would say probably the most common is around the 25 to 40 millimeter sized cabochons. And as far as shape, I think the most popular are rounds, ovals, and teardrops. How to attach a wired coil to your pendant? Well, there's a couple ways that I can think of. The first one is creating the coil independently, which means if you're talking about a double coil, because single coils and double coils are a little bit different. The single coil is a base wire with weaving wire wrapped around it. A double coil is having that single coil wrapped around an independent base wire. So if you're doing it that way, you can do it independently, where you create the base or create a coil using a base wire with a single coil wrapped around it and then attaching it to the pendant. And I'm trying to think, I don't know that I have a tutorial out there with coils yet. Coils, I will admit, coils are not my favorite. They're a little bit tedious for me, so I have a hard time doing them. But the other way that you can attach them is actually just wrapping a single coil directly onto a base wire that's already attached to your pendant. So for example, if you were doing a wire wrap and you took one of the base wires off to the side, you could wrap a single coil around that. That way you don't actually have to attach an independent coil. You already have one built into the pendant, if that makes sense. And I'll try to give some examples. I will try and do a video on coils. As much as I don't like them, I know how much you guys really like using them in your pieces, so I'll try and do one soon. So question number 6, Jane asks, what's the best way to fix a small gem into a bail? For me, I really like to use a figure 8 weave on my bail with 2 wires at the center pulled aside, and then I will continue weaving that figure 8 weave until there's a nice little setting for my stone. I will then place the stone in the setting and then use those 2 base wires at the center to direct them over and fasten them. There's also other ways of weaving in prong settings, which I have done for a couple pieces as well. I'll try to put some pictures maybe up here where you can kind of see how I've done that. As far as securing them and making sure that they stay put, tension is everything, but also even the shape of the wire can help. If you're really struggling setting stones, I recommend using square wire because it has more flat surface that can lay across, especially like a faceted stone. And so it's just more surface area coming in contact with the stone. So if you are having issues with round wire, maybe start with that. I have also flattened wire where I've hammered it flat and then done that. It's not the most ideal, but I have done that when I've had issues setting stones. I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, go ahead and leave it maybe a greater explanation in the comment section below, and I'll try and answer that in there if I can. Question number 7, Kay asks for any input on batch prepping frames components ahead of time. Honestly, I work one piece by one piece most typically. Usually the only time I batch anything or make duplicates or work simultaneously on something is if I'm doing earrings, because earrings you usually want to be somewhat symmetrical or mirroring each other. And that's why I usually do that with earrings. As far as pendants, I don't usually do that. I usually just work one at a time. I really like how unique they look when I do that, besides the fact that I'm also very impatient and I just want the piece to be done so I can gawk and ooh and ah at it. As far as batching though, one thing I would say is just cut all your wires out first. So if you're going to make a couple pendants or earrings, just cut all your wires out first at the same lengths, separate them into piles so you can just work from those piles. Just do that same step on one, then the same step on the next one, then the same step on the next one, and that usually really helps kind of quicken the process a little bit rather than doing one each time. I have noticed with earrings it does make it faster if you do both earrings simultaneously. I hope that answered your question, Kay. Question number 8, Lisa asks, can you explain and show us tumbling and why we do it? So as far as demonstrating, I can't demonstrate because I don't have a tumbler personally. This is basically what I have heard and understood from other wire artists and other jewelry makers out there, is that typically tumbling is used to clean the piece. So especially if you're metalsmithing, you're going to notice that there's fire scale that you want to remove, but I think you can also remove patina. So if you oxidize a copper piece and you want to clean it and you want to do it more hands off, a lot of people will use tumblers to do that. However, I have heard that they also use tumblers to harden things. So if you have a flimsy piece and maybe you want to try hardening it, that would be a way of doing it from what I understand. But again, I'm not an expert. What I'm going to try and do is maybe compile some information for you guys, and I'll put that in the description below as far as videos about tumbling and maybe even blog articles, so that way you can learn more about it, because I don't have one, so I can't really give you any of my own insights, but maybe somebody else can that does use it. So I hope that answers your question. And the final question, question number 9, Patty D13 on YouTube asks, when making any kind of bend, I cannot seem to make it sharp, like when we have to bring wires together at the top of the cab to start a bail and then bend them back together at the same place. You know, and from what I'm understanding, it's how to make sharp bends and have them be even on each side. So I guess she's talking about my bails. So you'll notice when I weave up the bail, about halfway I'll bend the wires back in and having those points be equally on the same side. I do have a blog article about how to sharpen bends, or how to create sharp bends, but also as well as how to create bends in general, making sure that they are center. Usually what I say is, if you are wanting, for example, on a bail, you're wanting it to be the same, maybe marking on your bail across from each other and then bending just outside the bail on either side, on the same side. So that way it is even on both sides, if that makes sense. The other question she had was, I have been trying to weave 3mm rhinestones in order to put them into a larger piece. I've watched every video I can find but can't seem to do it. Is there a trick or secret way that you can share? So for rhinestones, from what I understand, rhinestone, I don't know if you're talking about facets or rhinestones with the flat back. There are different channel settings that you can do that from. I believe Raftark has a really good one that's a fairly easy setting that is for faceted stones, and it's a type of channel setting using half round wire. He also has one using square wire for the most common, or more better known, I think, channel setting. I'll link his videos below where you can find those if you want to learn more about channel settings, since I don't have any videos on those yet. As far as how to do them, I will work on trying to create some videos for you guys, but until then, I'm going to link his because he's an excellent teacher and I've learned a lot from him as well. And the last question is, I try hard to keep my weaves exactly the same and not pull my base wires out of shape. Do you harden the base wires first in order to help with this issue? So I don't. I do not harden my base wires at all. I prefer them being dead soft because then they're easier to manipulate later on, especially when you're creating swirls. I don't really like to create swirls with wire that's harder than dead soft. But I would say that if you are having issues with your base wires getting kind of out of whack, again, there's this video here that I did, old video, very sorry, but it does explain a little bit about my over direct method, and just learning more about tension. When it comes to weaving, tension is everything, and it's just going to take practice is what I would say, because when I started, I had a death grip on my base wires and I was pulling incessantly with my weaving wire, and that was pulling everything out of shape. But as time goes on, you do get used to having a loose grip. A spring clamp or a ring clamp can really help with that, and I'll leave some links below where I get those. You can also get them, or get spring clamps at the hardware store, but those are really helpful. But I find that having a clamp and holding on to that, so it's applying the pressure to my base wires for me, and then learning to weave gently and using an over direct method where, because wire retains its shape, you can basically tell it where to go. And I'll explain more in this video about how I do that. And that really helps me understand where my tension is and apply tension as needed. So I hope that makes sense. And if you have any more questions, feel free to reach out. And that is the end of this Q&A video. I hope that you guys enjoyed the video. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and leave them in the comment section below as I try to get to them as quickly as I can. I will do future Q&As as well, so if you still have questions, keep asking. I'll answer the best that I can, but if they are still there, feel free to reach out and I'll do another Q&A video as well. If you'd like to stay up to date with everything that's going on behind the scenes here, I highly recommend signing up for the Learn to Weave newsletter. I have left a link where you can sign up for that. And it's also another place that you can reach me directly through emails that I send out. So if you have questions, I will answer them directly. And if you're interested in learning more about how to wire weave, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because I try to keep videos listed each week, either new tutorials, videos like this one where I answer your questions, as well as tips and tricks. If you are an absolute beginner and you're wanting to learn more about this amazing craft, you're also welcome to check out the Beginner's Wire Weaving course. I created this for people who have never touched wire before, but who are really interested in learning this craft, and you can learn more there. There are multiple modules with step-by-step directions, both written and video, as well as 3 projects to really test your skills and to see where you're at. And finally, if you haven't signed up for the Artisan Tutorial Vault, you can do that here. The Artisan Tutorial Vault is where I keep all of my available tutorials, as well as upcoming tutorials, written tutorials. You have access to all available tutorials at any time, just for $10 a month, or if you pay yearly, it can be as low as $7.50 a month. So you can check that all below. And I just want to say again, thank you so much for your questions, and thank you so much for helping me understand where you guys are at on your own wire weaving journey. And until next time, happy weaving.